Hello, and welcome to Stories from India. This is a podcast where we talk about myths, legends, and folk tales from India. I am your host, Narad Muni, and am a mythological character myself. I have the gift of eternal life and knowledge of the past, the present, and the future. By profession, I'm a traveling musician and a storyteller. So, the way I'm doing my job is by podcast. In this episode, we are covering two folk tales from the state of Odisha. The first story is very much related to the Sunset Bow and Arrow Challenge that most TikTok and Instagram subscribers are tired of seeing. The Sunset Challenge in this story preceded TikTok and Instagram by only a few centuries. The second one? The second story will make you thankful that it is just a work of fiction. Otherwise, scientists all over the world will be left scratching their heads for a long time. First of all, let me begin by saying that I do my best on the show to tell you facts as accurately as I can. So, for example, when I told you that Hanuman almost ate the sun, I wasn't wrong. The operative word being almost. I also had the sun god, Surya, himself appear in an episode or two, here and there. So you should know by now that the sun is alive and is a god. And throughout my show, I never ever gave you the impression that there might be more than one sun in the sky. But as if to prove that this story is indeed a work of fiction, there were extra suns. And not just one more or two more, there were six more suns. How did the sky work with seven suns? Well, I can tell you how a tribe in Odisha imagined it worked. They thought each sun was just a big ball of something hot that went up one side of the earth and dipped down the other, slowly changing color until disappearing and reappearing the next day. Even with the limited science, it was an inescapable conclusion that the seven suns must be responsible for all the heat and light. There was a meeting, the council of a tribe. There were seven council members. To keep things easy, I'm just going to name them after the seven dwarfs. You know, from Snow White. But just to be clear, the seven council members were of average human height. Doc was the oldest, and he called the council meeting to order. He stated that they were here to eat a grand dinner. And in between courses, they would discuss what scientists had been calling a dire emergency. He added some air quotes to that. This dire emergency, according to the scientists, had the potential to destroy all life on Earth. They called it climate unchange. The problem was that this climate wasn't changing at all. It was unbearably hot every day, and for that matter, every night. One council member complained that he got sunburnt even when he was indoors all day. Another council member, who was also the bartender at the local pub, chimed in that their water reserves had all dried up. He had tried adding steam to water down people's drinks, but the customers didn't seem to like that. Truth be told, these complaints were not new. The scientists in the tribe had long been complaining about how it was necessary to bring about at least 2 degrees Celsius of cooling if they were to have any chance of survival. Council members had, in public, proclaimed support for the global cooling idea, but only in very vague terms. In private, they had taken no actions at all. Hey, from their perspective, it meant more commercial opportunities. The entrepreneurs at the table were already dreaming of new ideas. They could market indoor sunscreen or flavored steam cubes to add to drinks. They really couldn't see a problem here. But that was about to change. A maid was serving them food. To be honest, most council members showed up to these meetings for the food. They claimed to the tribespeople that this was to save on the costs of having 2 separate meetings. But some tribespeople did in fact suspect that the council's focus was the food, and that the council only discussed policy matters to fill the gap between the soup and the fish curry. Grumpy was the first to point out what was going to become a huge crisis.
My fish curry has no fish in it.
Oh, it does, answered the maid. I made sure every dish has at least 1 tengra in it. The council members were stunned into silence.
I want hilsa in my fish curry. I won't eat thingra. I want my money back,
protested Dopey.
We aren't in a restaurant, Dopey,
Doc said, and he asked the maid for an explanation. This is all because our sea levels are dropping. If this goes on, there won't be any fish left. And then, no more fish curry. The maid replied, and then narrowed her eyes suspiciously. How do you not know all this? Everyone in the tribe knows this. We teach this in our schools now. After our climate scientists gave us all these conclusions in their climate report. She paused and asked, You never actually read those reports, did you?
Of course we did, said Doc quickly. We were just testing you to see if you did. And it turns out you passed. Congratulations. We'll give you a bonus.
Obviously, they were buying her silence. The maid replied, Are you putting a price on my principles? If so, let me make it absolutely clear to you, gentlemen. My principles are not for sale. For anything less than 1,000 rupees and 2 weeks extra vacation. That was easy enough, so the council agreed and dismissed her. Then, for the first time in its history, the council put its mind together to solve a real problem. They had a crisis on their hands. No fish curry? What were they supposed to live on? Rice and vegetables? No, they needed to take some urgent action here. Sneezy suggested importing water from the rings of Saturn, but his voice was quickly drowned out. Happy wanted to sing a song. That would fix the problem, he said. Hey, it had worked in a lot of Disney movies, hadn't it? Doc wanted to create another Earth and start all over. But then, Dopey spoke up. What if we turn off all the suns? No one reacted, so he explained further. Let's just turn off all the suns, for a while. not permanently. Then, when the climate changes, we can turn them back on. Everyone thought that was a brilliant idea. Dopey gleamed with pride. I got the idea from how we turn off the lights in a room if it's too bright. Same principle, except it's heat instead of light. Doc pondered.
It's funny how we have lights at all. With 7 suns, you'd think we'd get 24 hours of bright sunshine in every part of our homes. But that doesn't matter. What matters is where the switch is. Do you know?
Well, we can shoot them down with arrows. That seemed to work with our beach balls at our last beach party. And the suns are the same as beach balls. They both are large and round. It's just that suns rise and fall a lot slower than beach balls. That's the only difference. Everyone loved this idea, and there was a lot of backpatting and congratulating each other on their teamwork and swift decision. There was just one little interruption. It was when Sleepy woke up suddenly, asking what he had missed and if the fish curry was going to be served soon. He had been asleep throughout the meeting. After months of planning, the fateful day arrived. The day the suns would be turned off. The council members took up the positions they had rehearsed a dozen times. Doc gave the order.
Ready? Aim? Fire!
6 arrows shot out of bows and went right to the center of their targets. And 6 arrows hit their targets exactly as intended. And just like that, 6 suns deflated and disappeared. Wait a minute. 6? Only 6? 6 council members turned to face the 7th, with a big frown on their faces. And then they saw what had happened. Sleepy had fallen asleep. The 6 council members tried to wake him up. I suppose one or maybe all of the council members could just as easily have fired another arrow and took out the final sun. But they didn't want to do any extra work. This was Sleepy's job, and it was easier to criticize him. They were still fussing about cursing him when it went dark and cold. Had someone taken care of the remaining sun? They wondered. They tried looking at each other, but it was too dark to see, and Sleepy was snoring again. Clearly, he hadn't been the one who had fired at the 7th sun. As it turned out, no one had taken a shot at the 7th sun. It had survived. Since it was the only surviving sun, we might as well call it the sun. It had run away at the first sign of trouble and was hiding behind the mountains. Maybe it was the little bit of diffracted light that gave away its position. Now, who can blame the sun for running away and hiding like that? The only friends he had were all shot down. Out of the blue, literally and figuratively. He had to duck for cover from the arrows. The council, meanwhile, congratulated themselves on a job well done. They stumbled back home in the dark, expecting to be served fish curry again. Except, in the darkness, they stumbled over a cliff. And let's just say they posed no further risk to the sun. The servants of the council went fishing so that they could make fish curry for the council meeting that night. But there weren't any more fish. You see,
The fish were all in the United Animals General Assembly. So were all the mammals, birds, and reptiles. They had a big problem that they needed to solve right away. Their problem was sudden climate change. There was going to be an ice age, unless they did something. Clearly, they had to do this without and despite humans. The chimpanzees and gorillas were too embarrassed to speak. The recent actions of the humans had brought the monkeys to shame as well, even though the monkeys had nothing to do with it. There just was stigma because of the faint resemblance. The elephants wanted to trample down the mountains so that the sun would have nowhere left to hide. The eagles wanted to go fly to the sun and convince it to rise again. Now, you might be wondering how the animals were even managing all this without light. The answer is simple. Many animals have night vision, so they don't actually need sunlight to see each other. You might worry that this is a completely useless trait to have accidentally evolved in animals. If so, relax. This is just a work of fiction. Maybe you shouldn't take these stories too seriously. Anyway, ultimately it was decided that someone would persuade the sun to rise again. They decided to send only one animal. The sun was undoubtedly an emotional wreck at the moment, and it wouldn't do to gang up on him. So, they sent the cutest, fluffiest of them all, the rabbit. The rabbit went and pleaded with the sun, but the sun did not come out from behind the mountain. The rabbit pleaded and pleaded, but the sun did not even acknowledge the bunny. It might be enough to drive anyone hopping mad. But the rabbit was only dejected. He hopped back to the United Animals General Assembly. The lion laughed at the rabbit. "You're not really very smart, are you? You rabbits may have tricked us lions before, like in the stories that Narad tells on his podcast. But what's the use of tricking us when you don't know how to handle a simple situation like this? I'll go myself and show you." The lion was convinced that what the sun needed was a good scare. All he had to do was to roar loudly, and the sun would be frightened out from behind those mountains. But that didn't work. The lion roared and roared until his throat was sore. Finally, he had to admit defeat. He lost his pride. And by pride, I don't mean just the emotion, given his earlier claims, but he actually lost his pride, his family. They didn't want to stay with a failure. The elephant was convinced that he could wrap his trunk around the sun and physically force him out. But that didn't go well either. The sun was a little too hot, and the elephant's trunk was sensitive. So, yeah, the elephant felt that getting the sun out was like pulling teeth. Maybe worse. He'd have preferred to pull teeth. The peacock went next and tried to entice the sun out by dancing a lovely dance. The rain, the clouds, lightning, thunder all came to watch, but no sun. The General Secretary of the United Animals General Assembly was disappointed. "Let's just give up and resign ourselves to a life of misery," he concluded. "Wait, I must be allowed to try," said a voice. It was a rooster. Everyone laughed at the rooster. No one expected a rooster to succeed when so many of the other animals had failed. The General Secretary thought and replied, "Well, it's going to take us a while to pack up here and to go home to our families. You can try all you want, but don't expect any support from us. I declare this General Assembly session concluded." That was fine by the rooster. He stepped out of the building and cleared his throat. In a loud and shrill voice, he crowed, "Cock-a-doodle-doo!" Something happened. It had gotten a little more bright as the sun was finally beginning to emerge from behind the mountain. The rooster repeated its cry, and again there was a bit more of the sun that came up. And soon the sun was high up in the sky. That is how the world's very first excessive heat as well as excessive cold problems were solved. Naturally, this is why the sun rises every day. The rooster implores it to rise again. Those 7 council members are no longer a threat. That doesn't quite explain why the sun has to retire every night. But well, you can't have everything explained neatly in every story, can you? Our second story features another astronomical and environmental cast. It starts with Venus, the brightest object in the sky besides the sun and the moon. Now, Venus is called the morning evening star, but we all know that in reality it is a planet. In this story, it was not just the bright star, but also so much more. Venus was the mother of the sun, the moon, and the wind. Seeing the importance of the role that her children were playing in sustaining all life on Earth, Venus must have been very proud of the way she raised her children. But as we'll find out, there are limits to that. The story started when the sun, the moon, and the wind went off to their uncle and aunt's home for dinner. In keeping with the nature of the family, the aunt and uncle were Thunder and Lightning. Auntie Thunder and Uncle Lightning had made delicious food for their niece and nephews. You might wonder what kind of dishes these were. I mean, what do the sun, moon, and wind eat? But not to worry. These were regular dishes that humans might eat as well. So that included various types of fish, vegetables, pulao, and lots of desserts, of course. The kids had an excellent time. At the end of the meal, they thanked Auntie Thunder and Uncle Lightning and went back home to Venus, their mother. Venus, naturally, wanted to know all about how their evening had gone. The kids, very animatedly, described all of the amazing dishes that they had tasted. However, the excitement levels suddenly dropped when Venus asked, "What did you bring for me?" The sun admitted that he hadn't gotten anything. Why should he? He was just having a good time. The thought hadn't even crossed his mind. The wind said that he hadn't brought back anything for Venus either. He was too polite to ask Auntie Thunder and Uncle Lightning whether he could get something packed for Venus. The moon had a different answer. Of course, she had been too polite as well, but she had done something about it. She hadn't asked Auntie Thunder and Uncle Lightning, but she had scraped some of the dishes under her beautiful, long fingernails. She scraped off the food from her fingernails and deposited it onto a plate and offered it to her mother. The sun and wind appeared revolted at the unsanitary way in which the moon had brought back food. But Venus had a different take on it. Venus cursed the sun. From that day on, his rays would burn people and make them very hot and uncomfortable, which, in my opinion, is really punishing people, not punishing the sun. Same thing with the wind. She cursed him so that he would not be welcomed by folks on warm days. I don't quite follow the logic here because I've often found a breeze to be a gentle relief during a warm summer day. But I suppose this wind didn't represent cool breezes, only warm ones. Venus was pleased with the moon. She appreciated the thought behind her daughter's actions and blessed her for it. From that day on, the moon's rays would be cool, calm, and bring peace to anyone looking up at her. If you're thinking, what about werewolves? Well, werewolves didn't exist in this folklore. While Venus was blessing her daughter, the sun nudged the wind by the elbow and remarked, "There is no moonlight. All moonlight is really just reflected sunlight." Who's going to tell her? You or me? Well, of course, no one did. But there you have it. Now you know why the sun is warm, the moon is not so warm, and why the wind doesn't really help as much if it's already warm. That's all for this week. A few notes. The council members were brothers in the original story, and the sons were brothers as well. But why 7? 7 is a special number, not just in Indian mythology and folklore, but in cultures around the world. There are the Saptarishi, the 7 wise men, 7 voyages of Sinbad, 7 dwarfs. I don't know if you have seen sundogs, but they are a natural phenomenon that might give an unsuspecting person the impression that there's more than one sun in the sky. They are not a very common occurrence, though. Certainly not an explanation of what the tribe experienced. But I thought I'd mention it. Check out the links on the site to see what they look like. In the next episode, we'll do something special. One of you listeners wanted to hear the differences between various roles: Rishi, Muni, Sannyasi, Brahmacharya. So we'll explore that via the story of Adi Shankar. There's also a tie-in with yoga, and that's pretty relevant given that the International Day of Yoga is right around the corner. If you have comments or suggestions, or if there are particular stories you would like to hear, please do let me know by leaving a comment or a review on the site sfipodcast.com or tweet at sfipodcast. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook. Be sure to subscribe to the show to get notified automatically of new episodes. A big thank you to each and every one of you for your continued support and your feedback. The music is from purpleplanet.com. That's purple-planet.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.